Okay, we're going to do a quick review over what the creative nonfiction structures are. So if you go to the classroom website, and then go into the narrative tab up at the top, I'll show you where everything is located. So again, if you're doing a narrative structure as opposed to an essay structure, you can include all these different things: character traits, mood, tone, conflict setting, ironies, etc. But what we're going to be looking at is the creative nonfiction style and structure notes that we went over several weeks back. So just as a very quick review, the first thing is that if you are writing something that is based off of a personal experience, the best bet for you is to use the narrative style of writing. And again, this is all in that handout that you got with the grid. So again, a narrative is more story-driven writing. And again, that works best if it's your personal example. Chronological is the one that we do most often, where it's start at the beginning and then work your way through from beginning to last. That is most stories like The Three Little Pigs. Circular is where you start somewhere at the end or towards the climax, come back to the ending, and then go all the way to the end. So if this were The Three Little Pigs, this might start with the big bad wolf blowing down the second little pig's home, and then we go back to the beginning where they're building their house, and then work our way up to the end. So this may work well for you as a narrative. The drop-in is where we take out the exposition of a narrative and just start right with the trigger point or maybe part of the rising action, so that the reader is kind of guessing where you're going and how you got there. The braided is when you're playing with all the different timelines. So you start in the present, maybe go flashbacks. This is what Tuesdays with Maury is written in, or maybe it is present and flash forwards, present and flash forwards. So again, you've got the option, or you could do a little bit of all three. The parallel narrative is when you have two different perspectives. So this is where you would write from your perspective of what was going on, and then you write from someone else's perspective. Since you're not that other person, you might have to make up some of those things, but that's where some of that creative part of this creative nonfiction goes. You do the best at getting into another person's mind. And then a collage narrative is when you jump among several different perspectives. So you've got your perspective, but you have other people's perspective. And again, this is creative nonfiction, so maybe it's not just human perspectives, but maybe it's an inanimate object's perspective, like a wall in your house that observes all these things happening, or maybe it's your family pet that observes these things happening. Then we get into the essay. So if you're writing more about some ideas that you just hold true, but you don't really have personal ties to it or personal examples, then you should write it as an essay style creative nonfiction. If you do circular, this is what our typical 5-paragraph essay looks like. You start with your big idea, which is your thesis, or in your case, whatever truth you came up with. That is how you start. And then you go back through and you work your way in and support. This is my truth. Here's one example that proves my truth. Here's another. And here's a third. I would suggest at least 3 examples you could use to prove your truth, followed by conclusion. So it would still be that typical 5-paragraph essay. But do keep in mind, even if you do essay like this, you still need 5 senses, you still need dialogue, you still need action to do that. Another is where you drop the reader into the middle of an idea. So in other words, you save your thesis or the truth that you learned for the very end. You just start with these big ideas and talk about, well, here's an example of something that happened, here's another example, and then this is how I come to my conclusion that blah, blah, blah is true. Then the collage essay is when you utilize several different explanations to prove whatever truth you come up with. So if your truth is something about how people need to spend more time with family, maybe one of your examples is a study about people who spend less time at home and what that does to their happiness. And maybe then another perspective that you use is a story of somebody that you read in the news, and then another example you use is something that you've seen in film or television that kind of mirrors life. So this collage essay is using several different areas to kind of show that same idea. And then braiding is more persuasive. It's when you're trying to get your truth out, but again, instead of saying your truth right away, your thesis at the beginning, you bounce back and forth between 2 opposing ideas. If your truth is something about how pursuing money is a negative thing. You would present a paragraph about how money can be negative, but then you present the opposite side, how money is positive. And then you go back and forth between negative and positive aspects of money, and then get to your conclusion at the end. And then finally, the narrative essay is that dipping, where you give a bit of personal story, but then explain what that means, more personal story, more explain, etc., etc. So what you need to do is go through then and pick which structure works best for you, because when we get through and grade this is 25% of your overall grade, and what I'm looking for is a consistent use of that plot structure. So whatever you use, you stick with it, and then also whatever you use, it's the most effective at revealing the truth. So again, if this is something that you have personally experienced, you should really choose narrative. And if it's something that you don't have a personal story to tell, it's just a truth you believe, then you should do something more essay related. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what we're working with here. You should be writing your second draft. Make sure that when you start typing this in a Google Doc, that you actually label this as your creative nonfiction draft. So I'll just show you very quickly what that looks like here. So yesterday we worked on getting a truth. That's something that you hand wrote out. And now we're actually going to do a creative nonfiction. We'll consider this the first draft. And then whatever your truth is right here. And then you just start looking into what structure do you use. So again, is this narrative? And then what kind of narrative? Or maybe you're doing an essay. Whichever one, just type that out so that you know what you're working with. And then you just start typing away, and that'll be your first draft. And then what I suggest is actually titling this CNF Draft 1 so that when you go back through, you'll be able to have all that organized for you. All right, the rest of the time is for you to type. If you get the first draft done before class is over, you should work on blog number 10. But again, this is worth 20% of your overall grade, so the more time you put into it, the better.